Good evening, everyone. It is your boy GZTV. Welcome back to another video. It's about 10:30 when I'm shooting this. I'm winding down for bed. I just got done watching X-Men Days of Future Past. We have officially made it to the final 3 movies of our X-Men marathon. It has been a long one, but it has been a pretty enjoyable one to follow the arcs. You see the PCA jersey in the background. I don't know if I'm going to keep it up there because I'm kind of sweaty right now. But we're back with the X-Men marathon again. You guys have been checking me out, I'm sure, throughout, and this is the fucking one. This is the movie that I've heard people talk about is arguably the best X-Men movie ever made, and after finally watching everything leading up to it and seeing how all these different pieces come together, I absolutely get it. I might still say this movie is a slight bit overrated, and I know that's probably sacrilegious to some X-Men fans, but don't get that twisted because I thought this movie was absolutely phenomenal. Matter of fact, I think this is officially the best X-Men movie I've watched so far. What impressed me the most is just how much shit they had to balance here. We've got the original X-Men timeline, the First Class timeline, Wolverine coming off the Wolverine, 2 different versions of Professor X and Magneto, Mystique, Quicksilver, Trask, the Sentinels, time travel, JFK, and somehow this movie doesn't collapse under the weight of all of that. The Last Stand tried to juggle a million different things and struggled to give anything enough time. This movie arguably does even more, and somehow Bryan Singer makes the shit work, so without further ado, let's get into it. So getting into the premise, Days of Future Past takes place across 2 different time periods. In the future, mutants are basically facing extinction because of the Sentinels, these insanely powerful machines that have evolved to the point where they can adapt to mutant abilities, and how they were able to do that is really cool to me. And these motherfuckers are terrifying. The remaining X-Men realize that fighting them isn't going to work anymore. They're basically unbeatable. Their only option is to prevent this future from ever existing. Everything traces back to 1973 when Mystique attempted to assassinate Boulevard Trask, the man behind the Sentinel program, by the way. Peter Dinklage, of course, probably the most popular little man in Hollywood history. He's the man behind the Sentinel program. The future they know ultimately develops after Mystique is captured and her genetic material is used to advance the Sentinel technology. So Kitty Pryde sends Wolverine's consciousness back into his younger body because his healing ability makes him capable of surviving the process. It's a little ridiculous. I mean, some of the stuff they go with is a little crazy, but now Logan has to find Charles Xavier, break Magneto out of prison, stop Mystique, and somehow prevent the future destruction of mutant kind. And just on a premise level, that's actually pretty fucking awesome, right? So getting into the good, I don't want to make these videos too long, but there is a lot to fucking talk about here. Let's get into the good. Let's start with Wolverine. He is absolutely the perfect character for this. He is the franchise. Hugh Jackman has basically been the one constant throughout everything I've watched, so if you're choosing somebody to connect the original trilogy to the First Class generation, who else would you possibly send? And I love the reversal between Wolverine and Professor X as well. Eventually Charles becomes one of Logan's mentors. He's the one that kind of sets him on the right track as a mutant. Now Logan goes backward and finds this completely broken younger version of Charles. Suddenly Wolverine has to mentor his own mentor. That's pretty awesome. That's a really cool plot beat, and seeing James McAvoy in this condition is actually very intriguing. There are so many full circle narrative choices like that throughout this movie, and that's obviously low-hanging fruit given that this is a time travel movie, but still. And combining the younger and older cast might have been the best decision this franchise has ever made. That was one of the coolest writing choices. I know they probably did that in the comic books, but it's one of the coolest writing choices I've ever seen. I was worried about how the hell they were going to bridge everything because the chronology of these movies is already confusing enough. They didn't just find a way to bridge it, they made that bridge the entire story. They said, screw it, this is going to be the entire plot of a movie, and it's going to be epic. James McAvoy is also playing a completely different Professor X than the guy we saw in First Class. The school is absolutely collapsing. He's drinking, losing hope, taking the serum that allows him to walk while suppressing his powers. He's kind of like down in the fucking deep end right now. He's down in the dumps. It's weird seeing Professor X completely messed up because we're used to him being the guy who has the answers. He is the leader of this school of mutants. He's a role model to so many young mutants. Here he doesn't even know what to do with himself. And after watching Patrick Stewart throughout the original trilogy, I'm not even sure anymore that I prefer McAvoy, and it's such an interesting kind of development. I still love McAvoy's version, especially in First Class, but Patrick Stewart really grew on me. Young Charles essentially gets to communicate with his future self through Wolverine. That's one of the coolest concepts. That's one of the coolest scenes we have ever seen in an X-Men movie, and there's so many best ever with this film because it's just that way. What would the version of you decades in the future say to you right now? That's amazing. Charles gets to see that everything he's experiencing isn't the end. He gets to see what he eventually becomes. That scene was phenomenal. And then we get Fassbender's Magneto. Obviously we can get into him as well. Just the same thing, and I don't want to make this review 20 plus minutes, even though it deserves it, even though it is the most epic film in the franchise so far. But man, I've been saying Fassbender is my favorite Magneto, but Ian McKellen one has made that considerably harder after watching the original trilogy as well. They're both great in completely different ways. Having Magneto locked underneath the Pentagon because they think he assassinated JFK is absolutely ridiculous, especially when we learn he was apparently trying to save him, but whatever. It's comic book historical fiction, I can roll with it, especially because breaking him out gives us Quicksilver. Evan Peters was awesome. I love Evan Peters. I've loved damn near everything I've seen him in. Obviously, we've seen him recently in the Jeffrey Dahmer little biopic thing. And the Pentagon slow motion sequence is instantly one of my favorite scenes in the entire franchise. Again, that's another highlight of this film. That's how you showcase a superpower. Don't just show me somebody running really fast. Show me how the world looks to him. Everybody's basically frozen while Quicksilver casually rearranges the room, fucks with people, and saves everybody. The effects look great. I think like his Marvel comedy is awesome. Evan Peters is ridiculously charismatic in the role. My only disappointment is that he disappears for most of the movie afterward. I understand why. They called him because they needed somebody to break Magneto out of the Pentagon. He did the job. See you later. Still would have loved more of him, of course, because Evan Peters is awesome and would have been cool actually to see him and the Avengers, but I think it was a different casting. I can't remember who played him. And the Charles and Eric dynamic remains one of my favorite things about these movies. They care about each other, but fundamentally these guys are never going to see the world the same way. Mystique demonstrates that perfectly. Charles believes Raven can be saved. Magneto looks at the situation mathematically and basically goes, well, if Raven dies, the Sentinels never get her DNA and millions of mutants survive. Problem solved. It's cold considering their history, but I mean, it's Magneto. And this is easily the most important getting into Mystique she has been so far. She was amazing in this movie. Jennifer Lawrence is great, and at this point I think I probably prefer her version of Mystique over Rebecca Romijn. You might see kind of a trend in my videos. I do like the newer X-Men to the old a little bit. The entire future essentially comes down to one decision Raven makes. That's a fantastic way of finally making her feel as important as Xavier and Magneto. Maybe not quite, but pretty damn close. Trask has been experimenting on mutants. Raven discovers what he's been doing. She wants revenge. Completely understandable. Except killing him creates something infinitely worse. Charles wants to convince her not to do it. Eric wants to kill her before she can. Trask wants to exploit. Wolverine is basically standing in the middle trying to stop everybody from ruining history. That's great writing. And then obviously the Sentinels are pretty awesome as well. There's so much stuff to talk about here. Holy shit. I mean, the Sentinels are one of the most terrifying villains we've seen in any comic book movie. It's basically the X-Men's version of Infinity War or Endgame, where Thanos snaps. How do you defeat something that can adapt to basically every ability you throw at it? You don't. That's why those future sequences work so well. The X-Men aren't fighting to win anymore. They're fighting to survive long enough for Wolverine to change history. And these characters get absolutely destroyed. Colossus, Iceman, Storm, everybody. Blink was really cool too. I loved the portal ability. Warpath looked cool. Some of the newer mutants basically exist to get massacred, but I'm fine with that because it demonstrates how completely hopeless this future has become. And connecting the Sentinel technology to Mystique's DNA gives the time travel plot an actual purpose beyond simply resetting the franchise. The filmmaking is also absolutely phenomenal. I loved this. Bryan Singer killed it here. This is easily his best looking X-Men movie, and I don't really know him from anywhere else. So as I put it, I'd say this is probably my favorite Bryan Singer movie. X2 already felt like a massive improvement over the original. Days of Future Past feels like Singer finally had the resources to completely spread his wing, and my fucking goodness, he did. The budget absolutely shows with this thing. The Sentinels have this bizarre design that almost looks like Pennywise mixed with Demogorgon, mixed with prehistoric creatures and futuristic technology. I don't even know how to describe these things. They're such an anomaly, but they're memorable. Mystique looks great. Beast looks better. Iceman finally looks awesome. Wolverine's claws look better. The visual effects are considerably cleaner than basically everything I've watched leading up to this, and then Magneto picks up an entire stadium and drops it around the White House. Is that ridiculous? Absolutely. But he's Magneto. He's gonna do ridiculous shit. That is who his character is. The Quicksilver sequence is probably the visual highlight, but this entire movie feels like a major production. I love the 1970s aesthetic. First Class gave us the Cuban Missile Crisis, and now we've got Vietnam, Nixon, JFK, the Paris Peace Accords, all these historical elements integrated into mutant history. That's becoming one of my favorite things about the younger X-Men movie. Obviously, connecting Magneto to JFK's assassination is pretty ridiculous, but that's kind of part of the fun. And I even love seeing Star Trek playing on television in the background. Little did they know Professor X would eventually be commanding the Enterprise. That's pretty hilarious. And finally, most of the ending probably belongs in the good, so we can kind of talk about that as well. I know I used to do a section on the ending and the filmmaking separately, but I think both both of those are great here. History changes, Wolverine wakes up, and you get everybody. You get Rogue, Iceman, Storm, Beast, Professor X, Jean Grey walks through the door, and then freaking Cyclops. Yes, they bring back Cyclops. Shout out to James Marsden. It seems like he's going to be a part of the last two movies, and that's amazing. I'm completely fine with Cyclops coming back because The Last Stand did that man in the most dirty way. Normally, I'm somebody who gets annoyed when movies kill characters and they go, actually, never mind. But this movie earned the reset considerably more than most. We just watched an entire story about preventing the event that created this future. History changed, so of course some of these people are alive now, and Wolverine being completely fused while everybody else acts like nothing happened is actually pretty funny. To them, nothing did happen. Logan is basically the one guy walking around with memories of an entire timeline that no longer exists. And then they pull Wolverine out of the water in 1973. Stryker is standing there. I'm thinking, okay, here comes Weapon X. Then his eyes change. That's Mystique. I completely missed that at first when I first watched the movie, by the way. Once I realized what happens, it immediately created this huge question of what the fuck happens to Wolverine now? Because if Mystique gets Logan instead of Stryker, how does Weapon X happen? We've changed the future, but now we've also changed the past. That's a great ending to take into the next movie, and it's such a mind fuck that honestly, I kind of enjoy it. Getting into the bad, this is probably going to be the most minimal section of any X-Men movie we've ever seen. I don't have anything to firmly put in the bad. That's probably the biggest compliment I can even give this movie. There's really not a weak point. There aren't really scenes where I was sitting there thinking this fucking sucks, because there certainly were moments, there's been moments in past X-Men movies where I could definitely think that way. There aren't characters I outright hated. There isn't some giant filmmaking problem dragging the whole movie down. Obviously the CGI gets a complete revamp with the production design here. There aren't characters I hated. Even the villains, they feel like they should be villains and they feel right. Boulevard Trask has a vision to kill mutants, and I understand it. He's not hated in a corny way. If I have to criticize something, I think some of the new future mutants are underdeveloped and they kind of just throw them to the side as pawns, I guess. Blink stood out because her powers were awesome, but several of the others basically exist to demonstrate how powerful the Sentinels are. And I'm sure, like, if you're a fan of the comic books and you're watching this movie and you're saying, hey, that's one of my favorite mutants, that's one of my favorite characters from the original comics, they probably fucked your shit up. I mean, they're pawns, and considering how many characters are already in this movie, I can kind of understand it. You can only put so much in a movie, but that means I'm way more interested in the original X-Men and the 1973 cast than some of the new people they're introducing. I mean, that's really about it. Again, that kind of takes away from the current X-Men because, well, it doesn't make them as interesting. There's also maybe a little bit of emotional distance for me personally. I think there's kind of like a pre-discretion even going into these movies that, hey, I'm not the biggest fan of the X-Men in the first place, so you're not going to get me if you try to kill a character, if you bring one back, anything like that. I didn't grow up as a huge fan of the movie. I was more of just a pure MCU guy, but these characters weren't as prominent to me as, say, a Spider-Man or an Iron Man or a Captain America, just other Marvel characters that you've seen me give positive reviews for. So when Jean Grey walks through the door at the end, I'm not sitting there crying. I'm going, oh, Jean's back. That's cool. That's not really the movie's fault. That's not really something to the movie's detriment. Again, it's just kind of a pre-discretion. If anything, this marathon is finally starting to build that connection. And hell, if you guys want me to go back and read some comic books and you want to give me some suggestions, please let me know down in the comments. I love reading. I'd be down for it. So getting into the, okay, I guess like the time travel and the continuity, just that in itself could be a little bit mixed for me. Time travel is one of the oldest tricks in science fiction. We see it all the time. And it's dangerous because once you introduce it, you can theoretically fix anything and it's just an easy way out. Somebody died, go back. Continuity doesn't make sense, go back. Writers put themselves into a corner, fuck it, time travel. And let's be real, this movie absolutely gives Fox a way to clean up some shit, because The Last Stand, trust me when I say this, they fucked up a little bit. They fucked up a decent amount of things. Even though I don't think that movie is terrible or nearly as bad as people say it is, they definitely messed up some things. But I don't think that's necessarily bad, because they actually built a compelling story around doing that, and they found a clever way to do it. The future isn't mildly inconvenient. Mutants are being exterminated. If Wolverine doesn't change history, everybody is fucked. So there's an actual reason for doing this. Like, there's an unbeatable force and we have to go back. It just so happens that when you go back, it's all sunshine and rainbows because you made it the perfect storyline for the X-Men to still be prospering to this day. And despite how much is happening, I never found the story particularly confusing, and that's a big win here. There's one central objective: stop Mystique from killing Trask, and they turn it into a 2-hour movie, and I think it fully deserved that. Everything else kind of branches from that. Kitty suddenly being able to send consciousness through time, definitely a bit convenient. You would almost expect Professor X to be the one doing some weird mind shit like that, but whatever. It gives Kitty something important to do and establishes the rule the movie needs, and obviously I'm a pretty big fan of Elliot Page, so I'm not really mad at that here. The JFK stuff, obviously it's a little mixed, and it's fun and ridiculous. Magneto apparently being involved with one of the most publicly theorized assassinations in American history. Certainly a choice, but I mean, that's comic books. You take an alternate version of reality and you kind of twist it again. I really wish I'd talked about this more. There's so many great things we could bring up. This movie is incredible. Throw so many crazy fucking things at you. Colossus is in this movie, but I don't need this to be a documentary. Just kind of getting back to my point, I don't need this to be historically accurate. There's also the question created by the ending. I love the ending itself, but once you start thinking about it, this timeline is quite a mindfuck. Mystique disguised as Stryker rescues Wolverine, but Weapon X is supposed to happen. I don't know what the fuck happened to that. They didn't tell even that part of the origin story. I don't even think Mystique was in Origins the Wolverine, unless I forgot about it because the movie is that forgettable and that fucking trash. So I don't really know what happens now. What events from the original trilogy still occurred? What didn't? How much does Wolverine eventually remember? Does everybody else know anything about the original timeline? I'm not really sure. You basically have to rewrite history, and now they're going to do a big time jump to Apocalypse because, well, if they would have started it like this, it would have been fine because you could have just did an original trilogy like they did before, but now it's like, okay, we're going to time jump and we don't know what the fuck happened to even get us to this point. How did things play out after Days of Future Past? Now, I don't know if Apocalypse is going to make reference to that. We'll have to see. It's cool to think about, but this is where time travel naturally starts making things complicated when you implement it in a meaningful chronological franchise. The ending also runs a little long, but considering the implications of what they're changing, I'm completely fine with them taking their time. None of this is really bad. It's just the stuff where I have to go, okay, don't think about it too hard. Don't harp on it too much in the video. I'm just going to kind of throw some of my thoughts on these out there. So getting into the review, X-Men Days of Future Past is absolutely phenomenal. I understand the reputation, and while I might still call it a slight bit overrated, that's almost a meaningless criticism when I'm still putting the movie comfortably in the 9s. You'll have to stay tuned for my rating. The greatest accomplishment here isn't Quicksilver or the Sentinels or the visual effects or even the time travel. It's the fact that this movie somehow makes everything coexist and the balance of it. Everything matters. First Class, the original trilogy, the Wolverine, young Xavier, old Xavier, young Magneto, old Magneto, Mystique, Wolverine, and somehow nobody completely gets lost. We don't neglect characters, we don't lose plot lines. Compare that to The Last Stand where two major storylines nearly suffocated each other. This movie has about 50 things happening and somehow feels more coherent. Wolverine is the perfect bridge between these generations. Sentinels finally give the X-Men a threat that feels almost impossible to defeat. Quicksilver gives us one of the best sequences. James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart get an incredible moment. Fassbender and McKellen continue making Magneto one of the most interesting comic book characters. Jennifer Lawrence gets her best material yet. Bryan Singer directs the absolute shit out of this movie. It's a 9.2 out of 10. I mean, maybe X2 is a tighter and cleaner film, but Days of Future Past is the greater achievement. It's bigger, more ambitious, considerably more visually impressive, takes more risk, and somehow almost all these risks pay off. For now, this is my favorite X-Men movie, and if I'm calling a movie slightly overrated while simultaneously giving it a 9.2 out of 10, that's a pretty damn good movie, man. It's officially the best one. I mean, X2's right there, depending on what you're looking for. I could understand preferring X2. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe, follow, do whatever. Make sure you go check out the social media. It's been your boy GZTV. Edit this video by tomorrow. Peace.